down here so that we can chat with Iris Chang. Iris Chang, hi. I'm Connie Debley. Nice to meet you. Welcome to Book TV.
Thank you.
Thank you for holding on your two books. First of all, we just finished a panel on culture and the culture of fear. What's your thoughts when you think about your topic, which you usually talked about, the Chinese in America, and also your historical book, The Rape of Nanking, as it looks at our culture today, and for some people believing that there is a culture of fear out there?
Well, there definitely is a culture of fear, and I say that after 9/11, I mean, some of the treatment of ethnic minorities in this country, such as Muslim Americans, have mirrored really the persecution that Chinese Americans experienced during the exclusion era. So I think we have to constantly be aware of some of these cycles of history. And the Chinese America describes how at various times the culture of fear, or like these exaggerated fears of China in the American imagination, led to severe backlashes against the Chinese American immigrant population.
Well, let me show both of your books. Iris Chang's newest book, which is out in paperback, is The Chinese in America, which is what?
A 150-year epic saga of the Chinese immigrant experience in this country and the fate of their descendants.
And for book notes, you appeared for this book, The Rape of Nanking.
That's right. That's right.
And tell people who may not be familiar with Nanking what happened.
The Rape of Nanking is the story of one of the greatest atrocities of world history, when the Japanese Imperial Army killed an estimated 300,000 Chinese civilians and also committed the single greatest mass rape of world history at that time in the capital of China in 1937, which was the city of Nanking.
Our phone lines continue to be open. We'd invite you to join us. 202-585-3890. If you live in the East or Central Time Zone, 202-585-3891. If you live in the Mountain or Pacific Time Zone. Let's go to the newer book, The Chinese in America. First of all, why did you feel you needed to tell this story?
Well, I just felt that there was a lack of really good and accurate information on the Chinese American immigrant experience. There are some excellent books on the topic, but they came out decades ago. And I really wanted to expose not just some of the stories of prejudice, but the story of the great contributions of Chinese Americans to the United States. This should not be seen as like a foreign or ethnic story, but rather as the quintessential American story. It's a history of the United States itself, as seen through the perspective of one of its immigrant groups. And I found that every generation had to struggle for their civil liberties and democracy in this country, and it's an ongoing struggle. So there are a lot of cautionary stories in here.
Dallas, Texas, you're first up with Iris Chang. Hello.
Hello. I wanted to say thanks, C-SPAN. If you lift up your camera and look around at all the people around you, we are fighting the fear. The fact that you're standing there talking to that woman who is telling us we don't have to be afraid. People that write the books that tell us. Without C-SPAN, you don't see this. And it is what America needs, to see that these people are not afraid. We're not afraid. We are learning how to assimilate all the information, but there are plenty of channels. And C-SPAN's one of them. And we thank you.
Caller. Thank
you. Thank you. Well, I agree that there are many ways we could get this information out, but still, there's so much information not about American history or the Chinese American immigrant experience that really isn't commonly known, and that's why I wrote the book.
Give a couple examples.
For example, I didn't know that 1 in 5 Chinese Americans in this country during World War II served in the U.S. Armed Forces. I mean, there's probably no other ethnic group that gave so much, I mean, in percentage-wise, of their population to the U.S. military, and yet when we see retrospectives on World War II and we look at an Asian man in a uniform, we usually think of him as a Japanese enemy soldier or as, you know, maybe a Chinese nationalist soldier, you know, a foreigner. And there's so many other contributions as well. I mean, not just the fact that, for example, you know, that we have had so many Chinese in the sciences and technology and the Nobel laureates, but just how they laid down the foundation of civil rights law in this country was a really intriguing development as I researched this book. For example, the U.S. right to birthright citizenship was reinforced and protected by a Chinese-American lawsuit, Wong Kim Ark versus U.S., which now means that every American who's born on every person who's born on American soil is a U.S. citizen, whether or not they're their parents or their grandparents were citizens or eligible for citizenship. So, and it's really kind of incredible. It's what distinguishes our country from others, such as Germany or Japan, where your citizenship depends on the citizenship of your ancestors, and you've got permanent foreign underclasses such as Koreans who are living in Japan for generations, but they're not really considered Japanese citizens. So, but I'm glad you brought up the question of the culture of fear, because we now that our birthright citizenship rights have been challenged thanks to new legislation after 9/11. We have, we have challenges to that, where that could be stripped from us if we are deemed, subversive or supportive of terrorist groups. So I think we have to recognize that every generation of Americans will have to fight to uphold our system of democracy. It's an ongoing struggle, and that's pretty much part of our responsibility as Americans.
Next call, Hawaii. Hello.
Yes, this is Hilo, Hawaii. Hello?
Go
yes,
ahead.
aloha from Hawaii. One of the comments I wanted to make to Ms. Chang is that one of the things that is really unfortunate is that labels are given to people without proper reason to do so. In other words, everybody is a citizen of the United States if you're born in the United States, whether you're a criminal or a thief or whether you're in prison or whatever malfactions you may be guilty of doing. And in order to be a citizen, it really requires you to act like the citizen of the United States of America in your proportion to be able to do so. There's really too much emphasis put on what a person's ancestors were. This was brought up in the last panel discussion in which Shermer talked about people act like being tribal beings. One has to really extend one's concept of what one's neighbor is in loving thy neighbor. And there is at least one culture that advocates this.
I agree. We have to look beyond ethnicity to see some of the underlying human rights issues when we talk about upholding our American democratic system. If we're not careful, we could end up fractured and balkanized as a nation. And it's going to be interesting in the next few decades, because by the year 2050 there will be no more dominant racial majority in this country. So we could either evolve towards being a nation that looks past color and race and ethnicity and really and focus on character and contribution, or if we're not careful, we could establish an elaborate racial hierarchy like what we've seen in countries like South Africa. And it really is going to depend on the choices we Americans make.
When you go before Chinese American groups, are you able to look them in the eye and say, that the idea of identity politics and the idea of identity assimilation does not work for them?
Well, actually, whenever I'm speaking before Chinese American groups, I always emphasize, especially if I hear questions like, well, sometimes I feel like I'm half American, half Chinese. I always emphasize, no, you are 100% American. You can embrace your cultural heritage like so many other ethnic groups have done, but you are still a U.S. citizen if you were born here, and you are entitled to all the rights and privileges, and also, of course, you have to undertake all the obligations that comes with being a U.S. citizen. We must never forget that. And I always remind them, the IRS they certainly think of them as citizens, so it's important to exert our rights. So I am always emphasizing this, and that the issue of cultural identity, of being very proud of your heritage, and also our right and privileges as a U.S. citizen, those are two very separate issues, and we have to do our best really to educate people about our system. We have to be involved in grassroots activism. If the number of people, the critical minority, dips below a certain level, our republic will not have a chance to survive. So I'm always emphasizing the importance of sustaining our American democratic experiment, and it is very much a young and fragile experiment.
Let's take one more call for you. Caller, where are you calling from?
Santa Barbara. Santa Barbara.
You're on the air. Go ahead, Santa Barbara.
Oh, my old stomping grounds.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Ms. Chang, thanks for making that distinction between race, identity, and citizenship. My question to you is, is to your citizenship part. If you know, with all the problems that are facing Americans as far as governance being clogged with corporate money, so to speak, would you be interested as a citizen, would you be open to the idea of a constitutional convention?
A constitutional convention?
To do what, caller?
Well, basically a constitutional convention is like a national forum. It's just to propose ideas to the 50 states. And whatever ideas are proposed at the convention, if 38 states or more agree, yes, this is a good idea to be put on the Constitution, then it is. So my question is, would you be in favor of a national convention just to propose ideas and get a chance to see what everyone thinks?
I'm certainly interested in having national dialogues and having national forums, absolutely. You know, one thing that has constantly come out in my research as I've written The Threat of the Silk Room, The Rape of Nanking, and the Chinese in America is really the theme of power and the dangers of power. And you know, having these kinds of forums are going to make our society safer, because the empirical research has shown that the more concentrated the power in the hands of a government or any kind of ruling class elite, regardless of, you know, the more concentrated that power, regardless of that group's race, religion, or culture, or any other factor, that group is more likely to commit human rights atrocities, both at home and abroad, initiate war with their neighbors. And so democracy, true democracy, you know, has to be championed. A diffusion of the power has to be promoted in order to make our society safer. That's what the research on genocide has shown. And education is one such force to diffuse power. It returns power to the people, and engaging our leaders in dialogue or demanding access to government records, of really kind of promoting a marketplace of ideas, all of that is imperative to the survival of democracy. So I would absolutely be in favor of having national dialogues on these subjects.
What are you doing now?
I'm actually, you know, I'm continuing to do a lot of research. I'm touring right now the country to promote the Chinese in America, but I'd like to get started on my fourth book. You know, I've spearheaded an oral history project, a World War II oral history project, which has gained institutional support, and there's like certain stories that are emerging from that may be great topics for a fourth book. So, and so I would really urge people who are interested in my research, or maybe even sharing some of their stories with me, to go to my website, which is irischang.net.
Okay.
Yes.
Thank you very much. It's nice to see you.
It's been a pleasure.
Okay, take care. We are continuing our live coverage.